What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we have made it to our last and final season preview episode for a conference. We're going to do the SEC West, and then we're going to be right on to national picks. And we're only 2 weeks away. Really, we're 1 week away from our week 0 games and 2 weeks away from that big Labor Day weekend that's literally like 5 days straight of college football games.
It's the best time of the year. Like, once you hit that kickoff on Thursday, I mean, I'm going to start celebrating on Wednesday with some Jacksonville State UAB action.
That's right.
I think it's the Montgomery kickoff. I'm in on it on that Wednesday. But, I mean, even Thursday, though, because Thursday is kind of that day where typically there's only one game in the regular season. There's going to be like 9 games that night. And so it's going to be like you won't know what to watch. That's actually going to be a problem on a Thursday night. It's great.
And Ohio State's going to Minnesota with a new quarterback, and we don't know who's starting yet. Like, and again, that's just one of the games. So that's fun.
So good. So good. Friday, like every day, like what we did before when we talked about a game that we would go to and all this kind of stuff, you'd kind of, taken liberty to say that you would go to one each night, but there really is a marquee matchup each night that, if nothing else, you've got like a primary game to watch, each of the days. So
one of the games I'm most looking forward to that weekend, purely for atmosphere, is North Carolina at Virginia Tech, because again, both teams are 0-0. So no wins, no losses. Slate is clean. Blacksburg's going to be rocking, I think, at 100% capacity. So I'm excited. I know you're excited, but hey, let's dive into our last preview episode. Quick plug. Be sure to follow Daniel and I on Twitter at Deep South Daniel and me at Jacob Carnes with a K. We will be going to the Corky Kell Kickoff Classic this weekend, both Friday night and Saturday. So we'll be covering some of the top players in the country, including Saturday night, the top player in the country, Travis Hunter over at Collins Hill High School. So we'll have some pictures, some video up there. Excited to watch some high school football in person, Daniel.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Just kind of contributing to, what we know about recruiting and recruiting profiles. And, these guys, there's a lot of players going to big time schools. Atlanta is a hotbed for, players. And so it's just going to be cool to see some good high school football. And I love this event that it's kind of just a big conglomerate. It's kind of like, a one-stop shop. You kind of get your almost like your state championships early, because state championships are similar where they play all day in the Dome. There's going to be all day in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So I'm excited to see it.
Let's dive into the SEC West. And as we've done with all of our other conference previews, we're going to go in our predicted order of finish. And the SEC West, I mean, is there any other team you could possibly start with other than Alabama? Well, I guess according to SEC media, not everyone picked Alabama to win the West. In fact, Barrett Sallee picked LSU to win the SEC West. So I think he was the only one. We'll give our LSU thoughts in a minute. But the Alabama Crimson Tide, coming off of what I think, in my opinion, is the greatest college football season of all time with Alabama. They had the highest SP Plus ranking of all time. Alabama, to no surprise, has a win total of 11.5. So you're either betting that they're going to go 11-1 or 12-0. And obviously, we're high on Alabama, Daniel. So what are your thoughts on the Crimson Tide?
Well, let me start this by saying, I'm gonna give a quick analogy that my chorus director always gave us. He always talked about how it's easier to pick out one person out of tune when you have a great chorus rather than if you have a terrible chorus. It's like you can maybe find the positives a little easier. I think about that with this team. There's so many 5 stars everywhere. There's so many good players everywhere. Sometimes it's easier to be negative because you're just like, this one guy is gone, this one coach left, and it's just like this program is just the best program. And it's difficult to kind of quantify that sometimes, I mean, aside from rankings and championships, which is what they always have. So, but I think that with Alabama, it's interesting because like Saban has gotten to a point where not only he can just replace all these players every year, but he's replacing coaches more frequently than any other
Right.
coach on any high level. Dabo has had his coaches for a long time. All these other schools have just been able to keep their guys because everybody wants to get the Saban car wash effect of a bad coach goes in, comes out looking great. You and I both very high on Sark. Steve Sarkisian, him leaving to go become the head coach of Texas. We both are high on Texas now, relatively speaking, just because we believe in Sark. I don't want to question because of Saban's track record with hiring these coaches. He's hired coaches before that have had some dirt on them, and he's really made them look good. I'm questioning the Bill O'Brien hire. If I were to not know of Saban's track record, I would say I don't know if this is going to work. Same with I mean, he's bringing him in. He's bringing in Doug Marrone, a former head coach of the NFL as well, who's the offensive line coach. So there's definitely pedigree there. These guys are masters of their craft. This team, they're returning 3-4 offensive starters, 8 defensive starters, which I think if you were going to pick a side of the ball to return more for Alabama, I would probably pick defense because I think they just keep recruiting so much offensive talent. But Bryce Young's going to be the main one everybody talks about. He was number 1 or number 2 player overall, depending upon which service you look at when he came out last year. He's going to be their all-everything quarterback. Kind of a lot of people are, thinking of like a Tua 2.0 kind of style of play. We'll see how he fits into this system. I think that he's going to be a very effective quarterback, but they're bringing in some transfers. Jamison Williams at wide receiver coming in to be opposite of John Mechie, and then some of these other great receivers that they've already recruited. A G.E. Hall coming in. Henry To'oTo'o, I mean, like you talk about, you lose Dylan Moses and then you get the best linebacker in the country to come in. I don't know what more can really be said about certain, individual players. Offensive line, they only return 2 starters. Some guys are going to look at that and say, hey, this might be a weakness, but they recruit year over year. I mean, this year, their top 2 players that they got in the greatest recruiting class ever was J.C. Latham and Brockermeyer, 2 5-star offensive tackles who are, just super highly rated. And they're not going to see the field this year. They've still got Evan Neal, who's going to be a top 10 pick at left tackle. Just a bunch of talent. Running back Brian Robinson Jr., Jalen McClellan.
And Trey Sanders is making noise.
And Trey Sanders, he had the injury last year.
And the year before.
So he was one that came in and said that he was going to win a few Heisman trophies or something like that. So similar to LSU with Ryan Perrilloux back in the day where he said he's going to win 4. But, I've never had a question about Alabama depth-wise. They're going to have the talent. It's just going to be a new cast of characters. So it's going to be rinse and repeat. Sometimes that can seem lazy. I don't want people to think that that's where we go because we really do break this down. But there's a certain point where you look at it and you say, like, anything that I predict other than this is really just going to be a hot take. And, week to week as we go, if we see injuries like a few years ago, Alabama had a depleted linebacking core. So you could start to pick against that. Last year at times their defense looked suspect, like against Ole Miss. Then they kind of corrected that, We believe in Pete Golding because they had a great defense last year, contrary to what people, the national narrative may have been. And this is just a team that it just keeps getting better for them. Even if they take a step back to start the year because of what they lost on an all-time team last year, you still got to think relative to what's in that SEC West. They're still going to be a notch above everybody.
Alabama lost 6 first-round draft picks. They had the most players taken in the NFL draft. They're 110th in returning production. Alabama's one of, I think, 3 or 4 teams in the country, though, that when that happens, I don't blink even a little bit when predicting them to be really good. Like you mentioned, they just signed the highest ranked recruiting class of all time, not number one this year, of all time. And that's even with Quinn Ewers reclassifying to this year, becoming the number one player in the country, adding that to Ohio State's class. They still didn't catch Alabama, and it still wasn't very close. So, like, best class ever. I want to start with defense. You mentioned defense. I think the defense will be the best it's been since 2015. And I think that was the last time Bama had like a dominant defense. Bama's had a very good defense. College football has just changed. I think this will be a dominant defense. Now, dominant defense is going to look different now, even than it did 6 years ago in those 2014, 15 seasons. This is not 2012. You're not going to see Bama winning any more games, 9-6, or 2011 rather. But they got freaks all over the place. You mentioned, Henry To'o transferring in, but Will Anderson on the defensive line, their secondary might be the best in the country. Jordan Battle at safety. You've got Malachi Moore and Josh Jobe in the secondary as well. Last season, this is an offense that ranked number 1 in the country in SP+. Defense was 6th. They had the number 1 scoring defense in the SEC. You can't ask for better than that when you have that explosive offense, because your defense is going to be on the field more because of how often you're scoring. So when they have a number 6 defense in SP+, that is ridiculous. EPA margin, the expected points added, led the country in EPA margin. And, the offense minus defense led the country in that, which is no surprise. Again, best team ever. So
right.
Defensively, I think they're going to take a big step forward this year. I think the defense will be the best unit on the field. And that's saying a lot because we expect Alabama's offense to be explosive. So offense is going to rely on unproven, but a really talented, young roster. And I have the same question you do. Will there be a learning curve with Bill O'Brien? Not necessarily with the team for his system, because Nick Saban mentioned something this offseason that, what's easier for them? For the entire team to learn a new playbook, or for one person to come in and run their playbook and learn it? And that's a lot easier, which I think is brilliant.
Right.
If it ain't broke, and for Alabama, it's definitely not broke, then don't fix it. But will there be a learning curve with Bill O'Brien? Bryce Young is a freak. I have no question marks there other than, he hasn't played in a full capacity crowd yet. Well, I'll talk schedule in just a second where that might come into play. Wide receiver, you got young guys, plus you got a transfer in Jamison Williams from Ohio State that will probably come in and start immediately. John Mechie, the returning target there. Schedule. I think biggest chance to lose for this team, honestly, is in the first 3 games of the season. Miami is game 1. Then you got Mercer at home. You go at Florida. So, you're going to be in Atlanta when you play Miami. And that'll probably be a 60-40, if not 70-30 Bama crowd there. And so not as much to worry about there, but Miami's the team coming in with a lot of returning production. They're coming in with the experienced team. I'm not saying Miami's in the same realm as Alabama talent-wise. I'm just saying early on with a young roster, that is a losable game. I say losable, it's losable.
Relative to a lot of teams that they could play.
Florida's really losable on the road there. Bryce Young's first true road test. The whole offense is first true road test. Defensively, communication. How's your communication on the road? Offensive communication, obviously, with that crowd being, ridiculous. That's going to be a loud crowd. So I think those are the most 2 losable games. I didn't see the best 2 teams they'd play because I think that's going to come with LSU and Texas A&M. They go to Texas A&M. LSU comes to Bama. Last time they came here to Tuscaloosa, they beat Alabama. So I don't think they're going to win that one. Nick Saban's going to have Ole Miss and Texas A&M circled. Their win total set at 11.5. Look, last and final point, it's Nick Saban. I literally just wrote Nick Saban, period, as my last point, because this is the greatest dynasty in college football ever. And do I think Alabama can just reload, roll them out there and go 12-0? Absolutely, I do. 100% I think they can. Do I think they're going to repeat as national champions? There was a stat today that came out. It was an article on The Athletic. I'm forgetting the author who wrote it now, but it was I think it was Alex Kishner, but He was saying it's only happened 3 times ever that a returning national champion was ranked preseason number 1 in the AP poll, and they repeated as the national champion. Like they went wire to wire. It's only happened 3 times. The last 2 times were in the 50s and the 70s. And so statistically, next to impossible. But do I think Alabama can run the table with the schedule? Absolutely, I do. So we're picking Alabama to go 12-0. And I just don't think it's a hot take. I think it's just Nick Saban, Alabama, 12-0.
Would you say that does? I would say though that their season hinges on the health of one player, which would be Bryce Young. I think if Bryce Young goes down, they don't have the type of backup that they've been accustomed to having the last several years, where they've either had a Mac Jones on the bench behind Tua and or Jalen Hurts, or Tua and or Jalen Hurts as the starter / backup, or last year as Bryce Young being the backup to a Mac Jones. So I think that this is the first time maybe since 2015, like you mentioned with the defense, 2015, that was Jake Coker and Blake Sims, if I'm not mistaken, something like that, where, they didn't really have, an elite type quarterback. I definitely think Bryce Young falls into that category. If they have to go with the backup, it may be a situation where they're gonna struggle a little bit, to kind of meet the same expectations that they already would have. Do we think that they could win every game still by multiple touchdowns? Absolutely, because this roster is built that way. Jacob, like what we said, the way that this changes though is when you're playing the elite teams. So when they get to the SEC championship, or when they play in the playoff, that's where it's going to be a difference. So Bryce Young needs to be healthy for them to realize their potential.
100% of the top 5 teams, which we talked about this when we talked to Clemson, Georgia, Oklahoma, Ohio State. The 2 teams in the top 5 that I would be worried about if I lose my quarterback are Clemson and Alabama, because Oklahoma, Georgia, and Ohio State have more than capable backups on their roster. They've got 5 stars as backups. So, yeah, if I'm Alabama or Clemson, I'm praying for the health of my quarterback, especially Clemson.
Yeah, they don't have a scholarship guy behind DJ.
Right. So, all right, enough Alabama. If you're an Alabama fan, I'm sure you enjoyed that. If you're not, I'm sure you hated every minute of it. Let's move on to the rest of the SEC West. Again, predicted order of finish. Here we go. Here's something you might consider a hot take, might not. LSU. So LSU coming off of a 5-5 season. That's right after the national championship season. So we have them finishing second in the division. So I know what we think of them. Daniel, give me your thoughts on LSU.
Yeah, so it's one of these teams where you and I have both been, they didn't play up to their standard last year. There's a lot of outside distractions going on. And you also have some complacency set in from one of the greatest seasons ever the year before, and literally 14 players getting drafted from that team. So it was a lot going on last year. They're changing their identity a little bit because Joe Brady was gone. They're wanting to see if they could still be prolific. The answer was yes in many cases. They just also went prehistoric on defense with Bo Pelini, so that was an issue. It looks like they've maybe kind of righted their wrongs of last year as far as the coaching situations go. Offensively, I mean, they returned 7 starters offensively. Defensively, they returned 9 starters. Offensively, I think Miles Brennan being injured was more of a blow to depth rather than anything, because I think Max Johnson or Miles Brennan would have been solid as far as their starter goes at quarterback. Now Max Johnson's kind of the guy. They lose a few offensive linemen. Dare Rosenthal transfers over to Kentucky. Actually, that's the only one that they lost, because they have 4 out of 5 returning starters at this point. Keyshawn Butte is one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the SEC returning. He's just super explosive. I expect a huge year out of him. They do lose Arik Gilbert, to Georgia. Obviously, there's stuff going on. Not sure, he's got some personal issues, so he may not even play. But fact is, he's not with LSU. Um, Defensively, though, I mean, they keep recruiting at a level that they're going to be able to reload. And I think that, they are one of these teams that has a low floor because of maybe coaching or off the field distractions, things of that nature. But they have the highest ceiling where they have that ability to win a championship, win the SEC, like some have predicted, win the national championship, like others can predict. Mason Smith coming in, he's a hometown guy, 5-star defensive tackle. Sage Ryan, a safety. So bringing in some talent there. Transfers from Major Burns, a safety from Georgia, Mike Jones, a linebacker from Clemson. So those are big. Bringing in those guys, really think that Brian Thomas Jr. at wide receiver is going to be a big key for them this year. He's already made a lot of noise in camp. He's a big body receiver, 6'4", 190 pounds coming into LSU. And they've definitely used those big body receivers. And as far as running game goes, you still have Ty Davis and then John Emery Jr. In the backfield. I think that their talent potential is kind of through the roof. So they just have to line it up on the field and play to that potential.
I'm with you. So Max Johnson is who I thought would start, but he can't get hurt early. They do have Nussmeier as a capable backup. Just depending on how long Miles Brennan is out. But that's one of the deeper QB rooms in the country, even with TJ Finley transferring out. LSU's got the best corner duo in the country with Eli Ricks and Derek Stingley Jr. The question for me with LSU is, which one is the outlier, 2019 or 2020? 2019, they go wire to wire, 15-0. Some argue greatest team of all time. 2020, they come out. First game, Mississippi State drops the hammer on them. So, and it's like, all hell broke loose in Baton Rouge, and they go 5-5. So, LSU gained 10.6 yards per play in 2019. Last year, that went down to 7.7. So, offense-wise, took a significant step down. That's got to go back up. The running back room, talented, unproven. So LSU gained 10 or more yards on just 7.9% of plays last year on running plays, which was 122nd in the country. Talented running back room, unproven talent. They got to step up. They have their superstar wide receiver, and I'm with you. Again, young, unproven players. Offensive line before the transfer was returning 100% of their production. But outside of the one transfer, the entire two deep returns for LSU. So they didn't lose anybody else on the offensive line. Staff-wise, huge turnover of staff. Ed Orgeron had to swallow his pride, call Joe Brady, and be like, look, I need an OC. I want to do what we did in 2019. Who would you recommend? They bring over two guys that Joe Brady recommended. So I'm a believer in that because we saw what Brady did with the offense in 2019. Defense has to improve, but I think Bo Pelini had them kind of screwed from the start last year. Players looked completely out of position and confused by the first snap. And so I think the defense will naturally improve. And the defense last year was an outlier from what we've seen from LSU in the past decade. LSU's always had a really good defense. And so 2020 was the outlier. Schedule-wise, they play at UCLA in the opener, and I don't think that's not going to be like a 2 or 3 touchdown LSU win. I think that game's going to be pretty close, especially being on the road with a young team. I think that'll be tougher than maybe LSU fans want it to be, but if you can go on the road and get a W and get out of there, that's all you need to do, because the front half of the schedule opens up after that. That's very likely they go into Florida undefeated. And they get Florida at home. And then after that, that's when the schedule gets tough. They go Florida at Ole Miss, bye week at Alabama. Then you go Arkansas, ULM, and then Texas A&M. So schedule is definitely backloaded. But look, this roster is too good. We're betting on talent. Last year was a weird year. I'm going to say 2020 is the outlier. We're picking LSU to go 10-2. I don't think that's crazy given what they've done leading up to 2019. And then, like, again, 2020 seems more like the outlier when, I mean, since 2016, 8-4, 9-4, 10-3, 15-0, 5-5. That definitely seems like the outlier to me with LSU. So 10-2 for the Tigers. This roster is too good. I'm going to bet on the young, unproven talent. Win total's at 8.5. So we're going to court, a game and a half over that, significant. So we're betting on LSU this year. Bottom line. That takes us to number 3. What a lot of people have is number 2 in the SEC West, Texas A&M. So Texas A&M's win total is at 9.5. So a game ahead of LSU. They're coming off their best season under Jimbo and one of their best seasons ever. A lot of people argue they should have been in the college football playoff. Of course, they were at that 5 spot, just left out. And then, of course, A&M fans will be very quick to point out that the final score of the national championship was also the same score that they lost to Alabama by. So same score, same amount of points. Daniel, give me your thoughts on the Aggies.
Yeah, so with Texas A&M, there've been some media darlings for what they have coming back and just the way that they've recruited. And I think just Jimbo, his reputation, I think, has helped a lot. But yeah, 6 returning starters on offense, 9 on defense. I think that's really where the rubber meets the road is defensively, especially the line of scrimmage. They just got some dudes that are big deals. And I think that over the course of the year, you're going to see just their rotations on defense. McKinley Jackson, he's just a special dude on that defensive line. Linebackers, defensive backs. I mean, everybody it seems like is coming back. Offensively, they may be, they're returning only one starter on that offensive line. A lot of times that's an issue, which I'm still not going to be sold on saying, oh, it's no problem because they've recruited well. Offensive line's a little different. It's kind of like the secondary where you got to have guys who've played together and you can't just, fill out a depth chart with, oh yeah, we've got the guys. They've got to have played together and been a unit. So that's something I'm looking for. Luke Matthews at center, Akinola Gumby at left guard. It's just some guys who are going to be stepping into bigger roles than they had last year. I think they're both. Those are the kinds of guys who are talented. Who, if they play well as a unit, it will be that it could take them a long way. And then those will be the guys that all get drafted here in a couple years. It's gonna Isaiah Spiller and Jaden Weidermeyer is what this offense is going to be built around, is what it kind of was last year. Weidermeyer largely thought to be, if not the top tight end in the league, second or third, even in the country. So he's a big time, big play threat. Isaiah Spiller, he's just going to be a solid running back. Over 1,000 yards last year in the shorter season, 5.5 yards a carry, 9 touchdowns. They fed him a lot last year, and so I want to see him be a little more explosive than what he was last year. I think that they're going to have to be better outside and on big deep balls and stuff like that. Haynes King coming in at quarterback. It's him and Zach Calzada in like a quarterback competition. Most people think it's going to be Haynes King. He's kind of got a little more wiggle to him where he can do more of the like RPOs and the read option, that kind of game, to kind of take some pressure off of Isaiah Spiller. I think that's going to go a long way, especially with a new offensive line. You're going to want a guy who can move a little bit better. We'll see if he can have those plays downfield that will be needed. I do see where people will fall in love with this team because of the talent and the recruiting. Replacing a couple of key positions, I think that's going to hold them back from being the type of team that can take down in Alabama. But then again, Alabama's replacing a lot. So I guess if it's the right time, right place, right time, it's in Kyle Field. But, as far as where we have them, projected, I think they're just a tick behind those first two.
Texas A&M again coming off their best season under Jimbo Fisher. My first question was, is there a chance they upgrade at quarterback from Kellen Mond? Like Kellen
Definitely.
Mond is a super high ceiling, but he never put it all together like for a full game or even like a full season, even a full game. So there's a chance they've got some talent with Haynes King and Zach Calzada, and again, depth, which is important. One of the best running back rooms in the SEC. They return 96% of their receiving yards, which is huge. Offensive line, that's my question as well with Texas A&M. Defensive line will have one of the best defensive line units in the conference. They get Bama at home, and they'll probably go into that game undefeated. So you're talking like the biggest game, one of the biggest games in school history, and they got the night kick. So, gosh, that'll be a fun game. I just don't think they beat Bama. Bama's going to have that circle too. Nick Saban typically doesn't lose those like game of the season kind of games. LSU in 2019 would be that outlier, but they play Ole Miss and LSU on the road, which will both be tough games. A sneaky good game, Arkansas. That game's always really close, and they get that a couple weeks before Alabama, and that's in Arlington. So I think that game will be closer. But like I said, offensive line is the biggest area of concern for me, and that's why I'm not predicting them to go 11-1 or sniffing that 12-0. But 10-2 for Texas A&M, still above that win total of 9.5, which I think will be a great season for Texas A&M. So same record as LSU. You know, those are kind of the 2A, 2B teams in the SEC West for us this year. And if I'm Texas A&M, there's no need to do anything different. This is similar to Georgia where, hey, if you come up short, like, and you're getting beat by Alabama, well, so is everybody else. So, like, there's no reason to make any changes. The fact that Jimbo's gotten you to where last year you can go one loss, lose your starting quarterback, you know, returning production, 99th in the country. If you come back and go 10-2 and have another, you know, a top 5 class coming in behind it, don't do anything different. Like, Saban will eventually retire. It might be a decade from now, but he will eventually stop coaching. It won't be a problem for everyone anymore. So that's a great season for A&M. I would not fret as an A&M fan. Next, we got the Auburn Tigers. Auburn coming off of a season where they fired their head coach, Gus Malzahn. You and I are on the record. We've talked plenty about that. I'm going to mention it again. But their win total is at 7. Daniel, does this new staff come in and have a good first year for Auburn?
Man, it's tough. Auburn's one of those that their program is a riser and a faller. Just overall, they're a solid, good program. On their best years, they can rise to super high heights. Offensively, they're returning 9 starters. Defensively, 7 starters. On offense, they've got a good offensive line. They don't have a great offensive line, and I think that their ceiling is a good offensive line with what they're starting, because I've heard a few different people categorize it this way, Chuck Oliver being one of them. He said that they've got 5 guards starting on the offensive line, which I think is true based on what they've got. They've got 3 returning starters on that O-line, but it's just not the type of I guess it's actually 4 out of 5 starters returning. So that continuity is great that you have that. I do think that there's only so much you can do with it. They're going to have to kind of scheme their way into what they need. The receivers that they lost last year is really what's worrying me. Their top 3 receivers, Anthony Schwartz, Eli Stove, and Seth Williams. I mean, all of them were kind of they were all big play threats. I think they bailed out Bo Nix a whole lot. Bo Nix obviously returning at quarterback. He's at least got a competent backup in TJ Finley, who transferred from LSU. So we'll see kind of, long term what that effect is going to be. They're bringing in, I think that Harsin did the right thing with his coordinating hires, where he brought in Mike Bobo, who's a veteran of the SEC, as an offensive coordinator, a former head coach. And then he brought in Derek Mason, defensive coordinator, who was, a former head coach in the SEC. So those are big. I think that, they've got, Tank Bigsby really, I'd be remiss not to even mention him. 5-star running back, had a great year last year. I think this year is, I mean, he had 6 years. Let me read this right. Yeah, 6 yards of carry last year, 5 touchdowns. Bo Nix was their second leading rusher. I think for them to take a step forward, that can't be the case. They've got to have somebody step up as that second string running back because SEC, you need 2 to 3 backs to be able to do what you need to do long term. They had Tank Bigsby doing a whole lot last year. I think he was even on kick return, and it's like you can't do that if he's your only guy. You saw that in 2017 with Kerryon Johnson with them, where he got injured and could not. They didn't win the SEC championship. They could have if he was healthy. Smoke Monday, I think, is one of the better safeties in the league. So I think that that's important. But, as a whole, I think that it's important. They got some transfers in. I'll mention them. TJ Finley, obviously, I mentioned at quarterback from LSU. And then Demetrius Robertson coming in from Georgia. He's actually going to be taking advantage of a 6th year, which is, he's one of those super seniors. So I think it's big for him coming in just for the sheer fact that they need guys who have played before. I don't know, I think that he's going to have a better situation here than he did at Georgia. We'll see how that goes long-term for him. They don't really have a whole lot returning at receiver, like I mentioned earlier. So he's going to kind of be that bridge the gap while they figure out who else they've got. But this does have a danger of being a very one-dimensional team who's playing in the middle of the field and just running the ball and not very explosive. So they've got to have some guys emerge on the edge. That's really what the biggest key for Auburn this year. I think defensively they'll be fine with Derek Mason. Offensively, that's my biggest question for them.
Yeah, offense is my biggest question too. So one thing they did well, they didn't turn the ball over last year. So not a lot of turnover-worthy plays, which is great. You don't want to turn the ball over, So they not a lot of interceptions, not a lot of fumbles last year. They have a really tough schedule for a first-year staff, and not only do you play in the SEC West, but you go to Happy Valley for a whiteout game, and we know how loud and crazy that's going to be up against Penn State, and we think Penn State's going to be really good. Is Brian Harsin a downgrade from Gus Malzahn? You had a coach that averaged 9 wins this season. We're not predicting Auburn to have 9 wins this year. It is year one, but it's not his first year being a head coach. Bo Nix has to progress. He was a 5-star quarterback coming out of high school. I don't know that Gus Malzahn's system was the best for him. I don't know that Mike Bobo's system is the best for him. It's going to be hard when you lose all your receivers and you have a new offensive scheme to learn. So that's my other question is, does Bobo's offense work in 2021? I think it was great, at the turn of the decade, like you can average 40 points a game with the power run game and the play action game. That's just not the case anymore. So as Bobo adapted enough to have a successful offense in the SEC in 2021, defensively, you mentioned solid. Back seven is going to be amazing. Defensive line show some growth. Can Mike Bobo develop Bo Nix? I think that's a good question because he has shown some promise with quarterbacks. He did well with Doty last year at South Carolina. The Colorado State had a few, their quarterbacks played decently under him when he was at Colorado State. And, of course, at Georgia, he had some great quarterbacks at Georgia as well when he was their offensive coordinator. So they're really thin at wide receiver. Demetrius Robertson going over there helps them with some depth. This is still a pretty talented roster. They're one total of 7. I think this is a push to under. We're pecking 7-5 for Auburn. I don't see them I don't see them going 8-4. I think 7-5 best case scenario, and we're picking 7-5. So I think it's a great first year for Brian Harsin and staff. I think Harsin, there's a good chance he's a downgrade from Gus Malzahn, and so especially for this season, I think it's going to be a rough year to acclimate to the SEC for Harsin and this new staff. All right, 5th. Here's a team a lot of people are excited about, Ole Miss. So Ole Miss, left off of the AP Top 25 poll, which, hey, Ole Miss is in our extra point rankings. We ranked them. We're high on Ole Miss. Their win total set at 7.5, so half a game above Auburn. We have them here below Auburn, kind of. Daniel, what are your thoughts on the Rebels?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these where they can't be much worse defensively than what they were last year. So I like to go ahead and get that out of the way. They returned 7 starters, but it's their best 7 starters what they're bringing back. But I think that they really could take a step forward on that side of the ball, even if it's a minor step forward. Anything like if they could get to honestly middle of the pack type defense, I mean, they're going to be in the conversation nationally because of how elite that offense is. So that's something to really consider. Offensively, like I just mentioned, I mean, Jerrion Ely at running back and Matt Corral at quarterback just proved to be too much for a lot of teams last year. Um, excuse me. I think at receiver, I mean, they've got, Terry Drummond and Jonathan Mingo, and they returned 4 out of 5 starters on the O line. So, the issues that they ever had with, like Matt Corral getting hit, I think that a lot of that's going to be, taken care of by just the continuity on that offensive line coming back. And they're a team, I mean, my favorite player plays for them, John Reese Plumlee. But he has moved, from quarterback to wide receiver to be more of a kind of a gadget player. He's still running second team as their quarterback, but he's doing multiple things. So I think that it's a way for them to maximize their athletic profile on offense and kind of get the best out of everybody. But they're a team that I think, has grown. They get Taiwan Malone, 4-star defensive lineman coming in. So that he was their best recruit this year. So it's definitely Kiffin understands what the SEC is about. He knows this about recruiting. He knows this about recruiting line of scrimmage. He's working on it. It's not something that he's just letting go by the wayside. It's not these typical Ole Miss teams that are going to be satisfied to be, 5th or 6th or 7th in the SEC West and just kind of, maybe win a game they're not supposed to, but then lose everything else. I think that they're going to be competitive in every game. And I think they're going to be somewhat of a national power before it's all said and done with Kiffin. I mean, he's got Luke Altmaier coming in at quarterback at 4-star. So he's going to be the next guy after Matt Corral's gone. So I think that this train's going to keep going, the Lane train. And I'm expecting big things from them this year. When people tab them as like a dark horse, I think they just kind of it's tough because I don't think they're going to win 10 games. But do I think that they're going to win 8 games and be a factor in every game that they play? Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there any team with more excitement surrounding it than Ole Miss this offseason? No. Relative to where they're going to be, So yeah, Ole Miss, and it's because of where we are in football. Offense is where it's at. Ole Miss had a hot offense. Offense was really good. Defense was really bad. The offense scored a touchdown on 42% of its possessions, which ranked 8th in the country. The Lane effect, their yards per pass went from 7 to 10.3 last year. They averaged 21 points a game after halftime, which was best in the country after halftime. But the defense gave up 6.5 yards per play, which averaged 115th in the country. My big question for them is, I mean, with the way people talk about Ole Miss, you would think in their 10 games they went 8-2 last year, but they went 5-5. So like you have to calibrate, with Ole Miss. They played Bama really well, and everyone remembers that game. Bama won by 2 touchdowns, and they went 5-5. Like the week after they played Alabama, they lost the next 2 games against Arkansas and Auburn. So this isn't a team that's untouchable. This isn't a team that's going to separate itself and be the second best team in the West. The defense still has a lot of issues it has to fix. I do think those can improve, but then the second question is Matt Corral going to have another turnover game? That Arkansas game, he had like 4 picks in that Arkansas game.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's explosive. Can he clean some of that up? So, and I think he can. I think defense will be the biggest issue, which we have them going 8-4, which again is an incredible season for Ole Miss, considering that they went 4-8 2019. So to go 5-5 your first year and 8-4 your second year, that's a huge turnaround. They do play the two worst teams in the SEC East in Vanderbilt and Tennessee. So that's great for the schedule. How fun is Kiffin's return to Knoxville going to be? October 16th. No matter how good or bad Tennessee is, that stadium is going to be packed to shower Lane Kiffin with some booze in Knoxville. So 8-4 for Ole Miss. We're excited for the Rebels. I think they're going to have a great season. Let's go to 6th of 7. We got the Razorbacks. So Arkansas, their win total set at 5.5. Returning production is 39th in the country. Was it beginner's luck for Sam Pittman? Are we going to see a sophomore slump, or is this signs of what's to come with Arkansas?
Man, don't you just wish that Arkansas was in like any other division in the country? Because I feel like I'm high on Arkansas, but we're picking them 6th out of 7. It's just the nature of the beast. Like, it's just where you are. Go ahead.
Big Ten West. Where do they finish?
Big Ten West. I mean, top 3.
Oh, top 3, easy for me. Easy top 3. I think they're better. Oh gosh, I don't know if they're better than Iowa.
Yeah,
that's where I'd slot them.
That could be like a nice little side one. Like, hey, let's take Arkansas and put them in every division. Which ones do they win? I'm thinking they win something in the Pac-12.
I was about to say ACC Coastal.
ACC Coastal. They're a perfect team for that. Anyways, I'm gonna get off sidetracked, but this team, I like where its head is at with Sam Pittman. They return 9 offensive starters, 9 defensive starters. I mean, the production is a big deal. Trayvon Smith at running back, he had to fill in for Rakeem Boyd last year when Boyd was down. He led the team in rushing, 700 yards. In the shortened season, 5.3 yards a carry, 5 touchdowns. He was frankly just more productive than Rakeem Boyd in that final season. Defensively, I mean, Bumper Pool, Grant Morgan, solid linebackers. Like, they're just good SEC tackling machines. Those are the top 2 returning starters. Both had over 100 tackles last year. Eric Gregory coming back, defensive end. He had 2.5 sacks last year. I think that he's someone they can build off of and build around. But offensively, I really like I mentioned, Trayvon Smith. Every offensive line starter is back, which obviously that's Sam Pittman's specialty. Bringing in KJ Jefferson to be the starting quarterback. He had a good bowl game, and I expect him to just take a step forward. He's a solid, he's a high recruit. He's like a 4-star recruit. So kind of coming into a sophomore season, I expect him to take a step forward as their starter, have a big year. They do lose Mike Woods to transfer to Oklahoma, but I mean, Trayvon Burks, he was their best receiver last year, 820 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. I mean, that's just huge. So I think that's going to be a big deal. They get a couple of transfers in, nothing, crazy. You got Penn State transfer Trent Gordon at corner. Cade Renfro from Ole Miss is coming as a quarterback, most likely going to be the backup. But the one I'm looking at is Markel Utze, a defensive lineman from Mizzou. Obviously, Barry Odom has that connection as being his defensive coordinator or his head coach, and now his defensive coordinator at Arkansas. So I think that might be a big deal, just getting some familiar faces like that. But, I mean, they're just going to be a good team that's going to, give you a tough game every time. They're going to be a tough out. So they can ruin somebody's season. They're not going to go quietly into the night. And that's kind of that identity that we've established for Arkansas.
In 2016, Arkansas won 3 SEC games. In 2017, 18, and 19 combined, they won 1. Last year, they won 3. So, I mean, we're picking it to go 2-7 in the SEC. So that we're just keep on keeping on. I do think questions I have for Arkansas, offense, can KJ Jefferson come in and be really good at quarterback? Because I think Felipe Franks went kind of underrated last year, and he brought a ton of starting experience from Florida to Arkansas. That's a great quarterback to bring in as a transfer for a first-year head coach. I think he helped that offense a ton. Trayvon Burks is a bona fide wide receiver one. He'll be one of the best wide receivers in the SEC this season. On the schedule, they do get 2 of the top 4 teams from the SEC East, and they get Texas in the non-con. So 6-6, going to a bowl would be huge in year 2 with the schedule for Sam Pittman. And we're picking it. We think that, again, this is going to be a really good football team. It's just a shame they're in the SEC West.
We have them beating Texas, so there's that.
Yeah, little preseason sprinkle there. We penciled that in as one of Texas's losses. So
we've already talked about Texas. So I figured might as well let the cat out of the bag now.
That's right. We picked them to beat Texas. It's in Arkansas. That's going to be a tough out for Texas early on. All right, last team to talk about in the preseason. Here we go. Mississippi State Bulldogs. Returning production, 34th in the country. Their win total also at 6. Or I say also. Arkansas's at 5.5. Mississippi State at 6. I don't know what to make of Mike Leach, man. He's a pirate and he's a lot, but I don't know. I don't know what to think about Mississippi State.
It just feels more like a gimmick at this point, or a sideshow. Mike Leach, I respect him as a coach. I think he's a very wise offensive mind. The best interview out there. I mean, super interesting. It's funny because the SEC is just built different than everywhere else. I mean, it really does just mean more. So a guy like him who can set up shop in Lubbock for 8 years or however long it was, and then in Washington State for as long as he did, I think it's probably 7 or 8 years as well. I mean, I hate to speculate on a job, but I don't think he's going to be much past like 3 or 4 years here in Starkville if he doesn't show massive improvement. And I don't really see it. They do return 8 starters on offense, 8 starters on defense. So as far as the guys coming back, they are coming back. Will Rogers at quarterback kind of showed that he was, better than KJ Costello down the stretch. He ended up being the main guy. It just really, the air let out of the bag. It felt like that LSU game, they beat LSU, and we all just were like, wow, this is electric. The air raid has invaded the SEC. And then you start to realize that, once people figured out how to defend them, it just became not very explosive, very much like death by 1,000 cuts kind of an offense. Like they just kept dinking and dunking. Bringing in Solly Robertson, a 4-star quarterback. So, they're still going to have talent in that quarterback room. That's never been an issue for Mike Leach as a head coach. Defensively, I do think that I don't want to speak too negatively. I think defensively they do have a good amount of talent, and I do think that side of the ball is their better side of the ball. I think that they could be that could keep them in some games. But if you're Mississippi State, you have to be praying that you can just leave the SEC at some point, because this division is just too tough for them to have. They're never going to recruit with Mike Leach the type of player that will be able to keep up with the rest of the conference. So they have to out-scheme them. And now that everybody's kind of running some air raid concepts, they're not going to out-scheme them with this type of ball. Like there's better players at other schools that are running the same, schematics and stuff like that. So I just don't know. I don't know what that ceiling is going to actually be for Mississippi State.
4-8 for Mississippi State. I mean, everybody hopped on that bandwagon after week 1. Like you said, SEC wasn't ready for the air raid. Well, they were a week later when they lost to Arkansas. So,
Bo Pelini, who is circa 2005 SEC, was not ready for the air raid, but everybody else was.
Tough non-con schedule, relative. Louisiana Tech, NC State, at Memphis. So I wouldn't. 2 of those 3 are not guaranteed wins. In fact, I think NC State's better than Mississippi State. They do get Vandy from the SEC East, and they play Kentucky at home. But we're picking to go 4-8, 1-7 in conference. We could be wrong on this. They could be closer to 5-6. We're just not going to pick it. But that wraps us up. We're going to start doing our national picks next week. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at @SouthDaniel. Follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. That'll do it for this edition of The Extra Point. He is Daniel. I'm Jacob.